History, as we are taught it in school, is a series of dates, treaties, and battles. It is clean. It is sanitized. But if you peel back the layers of time, you find that the story of humanity isn't just written in ink. It's written in blood, and it was steered by individuals so detached from human empathy that their very names became synonymous with nightmare. We aren't talking about typical tyrants or battlefield generals. We are talking about the monsters who walked among us, the ones who took pleasure in the dark, who turned cruelty into an art form, and whose actions still echo through the centuries, making our skin crawl today. Grab a seat, turn down the lights, and let's look into the abyss. Vlad the Impaler, the real Dracula to the modern world. The name Dracula conjures images of capes, bats, and Hollywood vampires. But the man who inspired the myth was far more terrifying than any fictional creature of the night. Meet Vlad III, Prince of Wallachia, better known to history as Vlad the Impaler. Imagine living in the 15th century, in a region constantly torn apart by war between Christian Europe and the Ottoman Empire. To survive, you had to be tough. To rule, you had to be ruthless. But Vlad didn't just rule. He terrorized. His weapon of choice wasn't the sword, the bow, or the siege engine. It was a wooden stake. Vlad's preferred method of execution was uniquely horrific. He would have wooden stakes carved, but crucially the tops were rounded, not sharp. Why? Because a sharp stake would pierce a vital organ, killing the victim instantly. Vlad didn't want them to die quickly. He wanted them to suffer. The stakes were oiled, forced through the body, and then raised vertically into the air. Gravity would slowly pull the victim down, inch by agonizing inch. It could take days for a person to die. Days of exposure, thirst, and unimaginable pain. The most famous story of his cruelty is one that sounds like a horror film, but it actually happened. In 1462, the Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed II, marched his massive army toward Vlad's capital. Mehmed was a conqueror, a man who had taken Constantinople. He feared nothing until he reached the outskirts of Targoviki. There, Ottoman army stopped dead in its tracks. Before them lay a literal forest. But it wasn't made of trees. It was a forest of 20,000 impaled bodies, men, women, and children rotting in the sun, being picked apart by crows. The stench was overwhelming. The sight was so psychologically shattering that the Sultan, leading one of the most powerful armies on earth, turned around and retreated. He decided Wallachia wasn't worth it. Vlad was a master of psychological warfare, a man who allegedly dipped his bread in the blood of his victims during feasts. He set the standard for historical terror, cementing his place as a real-life monster. Elizabeth Báthory, the Blood Countess. Power can corrupt anyone. But when absolute power is given to someone with a morbid curiosity and total disregard for human life, the results are catastrophic. Enter Countess Elizabeth Báthory, born into one of the wealthiest and most powerful aristocratic families in Hungary in 1560. To the outside world, she was a refined, highly educated, and stunningly beautiful noblewoman. But behind the thick stone walls of Siege Castle, she was running a literal slaughterhouse. It began with a cruel streak. Elizabeth, bored with her wealthy life, began abusing her young teenage servant girls. A slap turned into a beating turned into torture. Because she was a powerful countess, the local peasants could do nothing to stop her. Their daughters went to work at the castle, and they simply never returned. But the legend of Báthory takes a genuinely terrifying turn into the occult as Elizabeth grew older. She became obsessed with her fading youth. According to historical lore, after striking a servant girl so hard that the girl's blood splattered onto Elizabeth's skin, the Countess believed that the skin where the blood had touched looked tighter, younger, and more radiant. A monstrous idea was born. She believed that the secret to eternal youth lay in the life force of young virgins. Elizabeth began systematically torturing and killing young girls to harvest their blood. Rumors spread that she would literally bathe in tubs filled with the blood of her victims, drinking it from golden chalices to preserve her beauty. For over a decade, the castle was a chamber of horrors. Girls were beaten, burned with hot irons, starved, and frozen to death in the snow. When the local peasant girls ran out, Elizabeth got greedy. She opened a finishing school at her castle for the daughters of lower nobility. That was her fatal mistake. You could make peasants disappear, but you couldn't make nobles disappear. In 1610, the authorities finally raided the castle. What they found was a nightmare. Dead bodies scattered, girls dying in the dungeons, and a ledger written in Elizabeth's own hand, listing the names of over 650 victims. Because of her noble blood, she couldn't be executed. Instead, she was bricked up alive inside a tiny room in her own castle, with only a small slit for food. She died there 4 years later, a monster trapped in her own darkness. Grigori Rasputin, the mad monk. Some people are scary because of what they did. Others are scary because they seem entirely unnatural. They possess a terrifying, unexplainable hold over people and an apparent refusal to die. This is the story of Grigori Rasputin, the mad monk of Russia. Born a peasant in Siberia, Rasputin claimed to be a holy mystic, a healer who could see the future and channel the divine. By the early 1900s, he had wandered into the high society circles of St. Petersburg and eventually into the palace of Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra. The royal family had a devastating secret. Their only son and heir to the throne, Alexei, suffered from hemophilia, a rare disease where the blood doesn't clot. A simple bruise could cause him to bleed to death internally. The best doctors in Europe were helpless. But Rasputin, through whispers, prayers, or pure psychological manipulation, he managed to stop the boy's bleeding. To the Tsarina, Rasputin was an angel sent by God. To the rest of Russia, he was a manipulative demon. Rasputin used his influence over the royal family to essentially control the Russian Empire. He was a chaotic force deeply corrupt, prone to wild, drunken debauchery, and completely untouchable. He whispered in the Tsar's ear, firing competent government officials and replacing them with his own corrupt friends. He was single-handedly destroying the empire from the inside out, and his appearance only added to the terror. He was tall, unkempt, with long, greasy hair, a tangled beard, and eyes that people claimed could literally hypnotize you. Eventually, a group of Russian nobles decided that for Russia to survive, Rasputin had to die. But eliminating the mad monk proved to be an exercise in pure horror. In December 1916, they invited Rasputin to a palace for a feast. They laced his cakes and wine with enough cyanide to kill a small army. Rasputin ate them. He drank the wine, and nothing happened. He just kept talking, laughing, and demanding more wine. Terrified by his apparent supernatural resistance, one of the nobles pulled a revolver and shot Rasputin squarely in the chest. Rasputin collapsed. The nobles celebrated, thinking the nightmare was over. But when one of them leaned over the body, Rasputin's eyes snapped open. He grabbed the noble by the throat, stood up, and began chasing them out into the snowy courtyard, roaring like a wounded animal. The nobles fired at him again, hitting him in the back and the head. They beat him with chains, wrapped him in a heavy rug, and dropped him into the freezing, ice-covered Malaya Nevka River, when his body was found days later. The autopsy revealed something that sent chills down the spine of all of Russia. His lungs contained water. The poison didn't kill him. The bullets didn't kill him. Rasputin was still alive when he was thrown into the river. He had actually managed to untie his bonds under water before finally drowning. He wasn't just a man. It was a force of nature that refused to leave this world.